My daughter told me, either do what I say or don't come to my wedding. I chuckled and replied, have a nice day. 2 days before the big event, I informed her I had canceled all the payments I'd made to the vendors. She scoffed, saying I wouldn't have the courage to follow through. What unfolded next took her, and even me, by surprise. Let me share the full story. Before we dive in, if stories like this interest you, support us by subscribing to this channel. Don't forget to hit the like button and let us know where you're tuning in from in the comment section below. Now here's how it all played out. I used to believe that true love, a father's love, meant giving endlessly without measuring or expecting anything in return. That's how I'd lived my life, especially when it came to my daughter, Camilla. She was my only child, born after years of struggle in a marriage that was already crumbling under silent resentments and unmet expectations. Her mother left when Camilla was still in elementary school, and I didn't bother fighting for shared custody. I took full custody, not because I had to, but because I wanted to be her protector, her constant, her safe harbor. For 26 years, I tried to be just that. I worked overtime shifts, skipped vacations, and drove an old truck for over 15 years, funneling every spare dollar I had toward her well-being, her extracurriculars, field trips, braces, tuition. Every decision revolved around her. So when she got engaged and asked if I'd help her throw the wedding of her dreams, I couldn't say no. Without hesitation, I drained my savings, every last dime, for the venue, caterer, photographer, flowers, everything she'd envisioned. I reassured myself that this was what a good father does. This wasn't just about money. It was about time and effort, too. Late nights managing schedules, updating endless spreadsheets, coordinating with vendors. It wasn't easy. But for Camilla, it was all worth it, or so I thought. She barely acknowledged my involvement beyond sending requests and demands. Gratitude was scarce. When I asked if I could invite my brother and a few close friends, she dismissed me with a sharp, "This isn't about your people. Dad, it's my day." I brushed it aside like I always did and convinced myself it was all for love. One day she'd realize what I had given and be thankful. Or so I believed. Then came the phone call that shattered any illusions I still held. One evening as I reheated leftovers in the kitchen, my phone rang. When I answered, there was no pleasantry, not even a hello, just a demand. "I need you to pay for our honeymoon." Her tone carried no hesitation or doubt, just entitlement. I froze mid-motion as the microwave door hung open. "Camilla," I said carefully, trying to process her audacity, "I've already emptied my savings for your wedding. There's nothing left." Her tone instantly shifted, from entitled arrogance to cold exasperation. "Wow," she said bluntly. "So you're just going to back out now? After everything I've planned?" It hit me like a punch to the gut. Everything she'd planned? I had been handling everything since day one, coordinating schedules, negotiating with vendors, while she busied herself curating Instagram mood boards. "I'm not backing out," I said, struggling to keep calm. "I've done everything I can." And then she said it, the words that finally broke something deep inside me. "If you can't do this for me, then don't bother coming to my wedding." Her words lingered in the air like a slap across the face. This wasn't rage, at least not yet. Instead, it was disbelief. After months of sacrificing everything to give her a perfect day, this is what she thought of me? That I wasn't invited unless I obeyed her demands? The word obey settled in my throat like a stone. As though fatherhood meant being subservient without question or limits, as though loving her made me disposable the moment she deemed me insufficient. I let out a dry laugh and simply replied, "All right, Camilla. Have a nice day," before hanging up. That night's sleep eluded me. Instead of resting, I found myself seated at my desk, staring at vendor contracts and receipts spread out before me, a record of every sacrifice I've made over the years. Years spent saying yes when I wanted to say no, giving more than I could afford because I thought love meant endless sacrifice. And then it hit me. This wasn't love, not as she defined it. Camilla didn't just feel entitled. She assumed no matter how much she demanded or how little respect. Even though she couldn't physically see me, I had never been more certain of anything in my entire life. I didn't make my decision out of revenge. It came from a realization too many parents never acknowledge. Love without boundaries can turn into something harmful. For years, I gave her everything. Her world was built by my sacrifices. In doing so, I unintentionally taught her that the world owed her something, that I owed her something. And the moment I said no, she revealed just how little she valued my effort and respect. So, I made a choice. I wouldn't attend her wedding. I wouldn't pay for a honeymoon that would only validate her belief that love requires submission. For the first time, I chose myself over her, and I had no regrets about it. 2 days passed before she reached out again. I ignored her initial calls each time her name lit up my screen, and the phone buzzed insistently on the table, demanding attention. Not because I wanted to be petty, but because I needed space to hear my own thoughts, not hers. I had to decide what kind of father I wanted to be moving forward. The man I had been up until that point? He was gone, done, finished, buried beneath years of misplaced obligation disguised as love. Somewhere along the way, my love turned into a duty that I carried like a badge of honor. But it wasn't. What it became was the slow erosion of my self-respect, and Camilla didn't understand that part. It wasn't that I stopped loving her, I simply started loving myself as well. The voicemail she left late Thursday night was exactly what I expected, clipped and tinged with irritation. "Dad," she began, "I don't know what point you're trying to prove, but this isn't the time. The wedding is Saturday. Everything is already in motion. If you think canceling last minute will hurt me, it won't. You're just embarrassing yourself. You committed to this and now you're flaking like a child. Just fix it and stop being dramatic." I played the entire message without any reaction. I didn't throw my phone or cry about it. I just stood in the stillness of my kitchen, letting her words settle like a weight in my chest. She didn't get it, still didn't understand. She couldn't hear herself or see the part she played in this breakdown. Camilla was so used to me being a fallback option, her constant plan B, that the idea of me resisting her demands was unfathomable to her. In that quiet moment, I felt my resolve grow even stronger. Still, to make sure my emotions weren't clouding my judgment, I reached out to someone I trusted, my old friend Malcolm. We hadn't talked much lately, but when I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. "Man," he said after a thoughtful pause, "she's been taking advantage of you for years. I noticed it even back when she was in college, always asking for money but never checking on how you were doing. You did what you had to do." His words stayed with me long after the call ended. It was a validation I hadn't realized I desperately needed, a confirmation from someone else that what I'd been too exhausted or afraid to admit was true. This dynamic had been broken for years, and finally I was trying to fix it. Friday morning, I sent Camilla a brief and direct message. "Camilla, I won't be attending your wedding tomorrow. As discussed, all payments to vendors have been canceled. This wasn't a decision I made lightly, and I hope someday you'll understand why. Dad." I didn't wait for a response. Instead, I turned off my phone, locked it in a drawer, and stepped outside for a walk. The autumn air was brisk and clear, carrying just a hint of the coming winter as fallen leaves crunched beneath my feet, passing by the small park where I'd once pushed Camilla on. Swings, back when her laughter made everything feel worthwhile, I sat on a bench and watched leaves float, down like nature's confetti, for what felt like hours. I wondered if this moment would ever mean anything to her besides anger or resentment. By the time I got back home, there was already another voicemail waiting for me. She had called again instead of texting this time. It must have felt more urgent to her now. Her voice was strained and edged with panic as she said, "You can't do this. Derek and I both agree. You're bluffing. You wouldn't humiliate me like this in front of everyone. You're just trying to make some kind of point. Well, message received. You've made your little stand. Now fix it." I shook my head in pure disbelief. Even now, even after everything laid bare, she's still where I'd gone else could. "You stood up for yourself." It was a small solace amidst the storm, but it meant something. The rest of the day unfolded in fits and starts. I stayed home, alternating between moments of clarity and waves of doubt. It wasn't easy, listening to the world scream at me through my phone, accusing me of wrongdoing, selfishness, even cruelty. But as the hours passed, I began to feel a certain liberation. It wasn't that I felt proud of what had happened. Pride wasn't the right word. It was more a sense of acceptance. For years, I had been trapped in a cycle, mistaking self-sacrifice for love, enabling for support, and silence for peace. Walking away from that cycle felt foreign, like learning to breathe a different air, but it also felt necessary. No matter how much I loved her, and oh, how deeply I did, I couldn't carry the weight alone anymore, not at the expense of myself. By evening, the calls and messages slowed. The outrage ebbed, leaving behind an unsettling quiet. I stepped outside into the cool night air, letting it wash over me like a balm. The stars were faint against the city glow, but they were there, steady and indifferent as ever. I leaned against the railing, staring upward, grounding myself in their permanence. That night I slept better than I had in months, not deeply, but peacefully, the kind of sleep that doesn't leave you feeling robbed when morning comes. When I woke up, the first light of dawn was spilling through my window. It felt symbolic somehow, as if the universe itself was granting me permission to start anew. Camilla might hate me for what I did. Maybe she always would. Maybe she would never understand that my absence at her wedding wasn't an act of vengeance, but an act of survival. And that was something I had to learn to live with, too. Closure doesn't necessarily come with resolution or forgiveness. It comes with knowing you did what you had to do. The days that followed weren't any easier. Relationships frayed further. Words were said that couldn't be unsaid. But through it all, I kept holding on to one truth. You can't build love on the foundation of losing yourself. Maybe there's a way forward for us someday, a way to rebuild with mutual respect instead of resentment. But until that day comes, if it ever does, I'm finally learning how to stand in my own life. And that was worth every second of discomfort, no matter how much it hurt ever had the courage to do. I respect that. I didn't respond, but I read it twice. By the early afternoon, I made myself some lunch, sat out on the porch, and listened to the breeze. My thoughts wandered to the other side of town, to the chaos, the embarrassment, and the frantic efforts to salvage what was left of the day. I pictured Camilla pacing in her gown, mascara streaked, trying to comprehend how her perfect day had unraveled into a public spectacle. It hurt to imagine her like that, but I reminded myself once more, I hadn't done this to hurt her. I had done it to protect myself, and perhaps in a way to protect her from becoming someone she might eventually resent when the applause faded and reality set in. Around 4 Wow, Ellie arrived. My niece was the only one who neither called nor texted. Instead, she knocked on the door with a brown bag of takeout and a 6-pack in hand. "You look like you need this," she said. I let her in silently. We sat at the kitchen table, picking at fries and sipping on beer in shared silence for a long while. Then she broke it. The whole wedding fell apart. People were whispering. Derek's dad almost got into a fight with the venue coordinator. It was chaos. I nodded slowly, letting it sink in. "I'm sorry you had to see that." She shrugged. "Honestly, I'm glad I did. It made everything make sense." Ellie leaned back in her chair and studied me for a moment. "You know, for years people would gossip about how you spoiled her, how she never learned gratitude. I always thought they were just envious. But today I saw it for myself. You gave her everything, and still she looked at you like you owed her more." I stared into my glass, watching lazy bubbles rise to the top of the fizzing beer. "All I ever wanted was for her to feel loved," I murmured. "That's it." Ellie reached across the table and placed her hand gently over mine. She is. But now she has to figure out what to do with that love. And you've got to figure out how to live without being drained by it. After Ellie left that evening, I sat alone on the porch. One by one, the streetlights flickered on as shadows deepened around me. My mind wandered back to the man I used to be. The man who would have shown up today with a forced smile and empty pockets, desperate for a shred of acknowledgement. Then I considered the man I had become tonight, sitting here in the dark, heart heavy but intact. I hadn't destroyed my daughter's wedding. I had simply refused to uphold a fantasy that chipped away at me bit by bit, and I didn't regret it. On Sunday morning, the adrenaline had finally ebbed away, leaving in its wake a slow-burning exhaustion. There wasn't any regret when I woke up, but something else lingered. A hollow emptiness, as though a part of me had quietly been removed in my sleep. The wedding was over now. No ceremony, no celebration, not even a father giving his daughter away. The absence wasn't just silent, it became palpable, coloring everything around me in its starkness. I walked through my house, through the living room and into the kitchen, like navigating the ruins of some private revolution. The coffee still tasted the same. The morning breeze still crept through the blinds. But I knew that I wasn't quite the same anymore. Not completely transformed, just clearer and empty in a way that felt different. Peaceful, even. The performance was finally over. I was no longer in its spotlight. Then came the backlash. I had deliberately left my phone untouched for most of Saturday night, It had been blissfully silent, but curiosity got the better of me by morning. My inbox overflowed with venomous messages from Camilla's friends, her in-laws, and even a few distant relatives, each stake aimed at my heart. Selfish, heartless, immature. One particularly nasty message from her fiancé's aunt read, "You humiliated your daughter in front of her entire community. Hope you can live with yourself." I read each bitter word as if chewing on something coarse and dry, swallowing without flinching, because for once in my life, I knew who I was. And nothing anyone said could sway me from that clarity, not when they hadn't lived in my shoes for 2 decades, watching emotional resources bleed dry. Not when they didn't hear their child say with cold defiance, "Obey me or don't come." Still. Part of me needed to understand just how bad things were, not to gloat, but to comprehend fully what we'd all endured and lost in this unraveling storm. So I wrote Ellie, "How bad was it?" Paused in the middle of sending a text to say she admired my courage. An old neighbor, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, sent a quick message. "Good for you. Boundaries matter." These small moments of understanding were unexpected and fueled me in a way I hadn't anticipated. Still, they didn't erase the noise, the calls, the texts, the blame hurled my way by those who didn't know, or maybe didn't care to know, the full story. By Friday, I figured the worst of it had passed. The initial explosion of gossip at work and the bitter aftermath with family had tapered off. But inside, I still felt uneasy. It wasn't guilt. It was something heavier than that. Maybe it was the weight of finally sticking to boundaries I should have set years ago, or maybe it was sadness for what had been lost along the way. Either way, I carried it with me as I tried to make peace with this new reality. That weekend, I stayed in. Not hiding, really, just choosing quiet over confrontation. I mowed the lawn, fixed a leaky faucet I'd been ignoring, and made a meal big enough to last for 2 days. But cooking for one felt different now, almost an acknowledgement of something final. Not loneliness exactly, it was too soon to call it that, but solitude. And for once, instead of shrinking from it or chasing distractions, I let it settle. Sunday morning brought a surprise, though. My son Eric called, a rarity in itself, and what surprised me even more was that he wanted to talk about what had happened. "Hey," was all he said at first. His voice was cautious, not critical. "Hey," I replied, unsure where this was going. He paused before adding, "I didn't know things with Camilla were that bad." He wasn't accusing me or defending her. He was just trying to understand, and his effort caught me off guard. "You know how she is," I said carefully. "I've let so much slide over the years because she's my daughter." But this time, it crossed the line. Eric sighed on the other end of the call, and I felt it, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared frustration. "I get it," he finally said. "It wasn't my place to say it before, but yeah. She's been pretty out of line lately." We talked for almost an hour after that. About family, about how hard it is to navigate emotions we don't want to admit we feel. Hurt, disappointment, even regret. By the time we hung up, I felt something in me shift again. The world didn't seem so starkly divided anymore, me versus them, right versus wrong. There was gray space, nuance, room for conversation. Maybe not with everyone. Camila was still silent except for her single accusatory message, but perhaps with some of them. The next few weeks brought small changes. My sister called again, not to apologize exactly, but her tone was softer this time. She wanted to check in and make sure you're doing okay. It was an olive branch of sorts, and I took it, knowing better than to expect perfection from people still processing their own feelings. Progress doesn't always look like resolution. Sometimes progress is simply choosing not to regress. I didn't hear from Camilla again for months, and when I did, it wasn't the heartfelt apology I'd once hoped for as much as an acknowledgement, a careful step toward opening a dialogue. She sent a short message. "I don't know if I'll ever totally understand why you did it, but maybe I didn't give you a choice." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it wasn't blame either. It was something in between, and that was enough for now. Life didn't suddenly return to normal, whatever normal even meant anymore, but it did continue moving forward, reshaping itself into something better suited to who I had become. And even though the past lingered like a bruise barely visible beneath the surface, I started seeing things differently. Not just my mistakes or Camilla's behavior, but all of it. Everything that brought us to where we were now. There's no guidebook for this kind of thing, no manual on what to do when love collides with boundaries or when loyalty demands more than you can afford to give without breaking yourself in two. You just do your best until your best isn't enough anymore, and then hope that someday, somehow, it will be enough for someone else. Even if that someone is just you, someone I hadn't seen in years messaged me on Facebook. It happened around the time of the wedding. At first, I didn't understand what was going on, but once I figured it out, I wanted to tell them, I get it. My dad gave everything to my sister too, and she treated him in the same way. You're not alone. That sentiment lingered with me for a long time. It was odd how these quiet, personal confessions from people on the outskirts of my life carried more weight, felt more genuine than anything I was getting from those closest to me. Maybe it was because people on the outside had nothing to gain, no stakes, no use for emotional manipulation, just an unfiltered perspective. Camilla, however, mostly remained silent. There was one more message from her, though. It arrived late one night, just before midnight. I had just climbed into bed, with the room dark and the soft hum of the ceiling fan filling the space. My phone buzzed once. The message read simply, I hope you're proud of yourself. That was it. No name, no obvious anger or vulnerability, just a frigid sentence meant to sting. I stared at it, not because it hurt, but because of what it said without saying much at all. She didn't understand. She thought this was about pride or one of us winning, but that wasn't the case. It never was about being right. It was about being done. I didn't reply, not out of resentment, but out of wisdom that had been hard-earned. Over time, I'd learned that sometimes letting go is the most loving thing you can do, not to punish someone else, but to protect whatever is left of yourself that hasn't been broken. I had given Camilla everything I had, money, time, energy, even parts of my identity, and when there was nothing left to give, she responded with an ultimatum, expecting me to bow down. I refused. I wouldn't reward manipulation and wouldn't teach myself that peace only existed in submission. Still, my thoughts often drifted back to her, not as the adult standing in a white dress on her wedding day, but as a little girl sleeping peacefully in the back seat after soccer practice, or as a heartbroken teenager calling me in tears because she didn't get into her first-choice college. That Camilla, the one full of vulnerability and hope, was who I remembered best. A part of me believed she might still be in there somewhere, buried beneath her defenses, or at least I prayed for that. And yet, even if she managed to return to that version of herself, it was clear she'd have to do so without me holding her hand along the way. That's what boundaries have come to mean, love from a distance, respect without requiring proximity. Ellie visited the following Saturday like she had made it a habit, that time bringing donuts along with her company. She settled into her usual spot on the porch and began talking between bites. She mentioned Camilla hadn't said much lately, but seemed different, quieter and angrier, but not at me. More at herself, she surmised. I didn't dig for details or press her for answers. I merely nodded as Ellie continued sipping her coffee. She eventually added that people were starting to view things differently now, realizing my decisions weren't rooted in pettiness but in self-respect. Her observation caught me off guard. I asked her if she really believed that, genuinely curious. She only shrugged and said it wasn't about what anyone else thought. Instead, it all came down to what I believed. Even so, she assured me that others were coming around more than I realized. Later that evening, I went on a solo walk, no music or phone calls to distract me, just gravel crunching underfoot and the sound of the wind filtering through the trees. My route took me past a wedding venue near the lake, a different one than we had originally booked for. Camila and I watched a bride and groom pose for pictures, while their beaming parents stood nearby. To my surprise, I didn't feel resentment, just a quiet ache, bittersweet in its intensity. Not regret for how things turned out, but rather for the illusion I'd clung to for so long. This belief that boundless sacrifice equaled love, or that giving endlessly meant being a good parent. Sitting at my kitchen table later that night, I turned on the lamp and pulled out a letter Camilla had sent earlier that month, one in which she admitted not just her anger and confusion, but even faintly hinted at understanding. The first time I read it, it weighed on me heavily, filled with unspoken ghosts of blame and history, but reading it now brought clarity instead of sadness. Not every broken bond gets fixed. Not every apology leads to repair or reconciliation, but maybe this could be. For the first time in decades, I felt a profound sense of freedom. freedom from the need to prove my worth in anyone's life. That alone made everything I had lost worthwhile. Camilla hadn't reached out in 3 weeks. No calls, no texts, no contact of any kind. I figured we had entered that silent standoff phase, where neither side knows how to bridge the gap, so they remain silent. An apology wasn't something I expected anymore. This wasn't about that. What I longed for, what I'd always longed for, was respect. Not gratitude or praise, just the simple human desire to be treated as more than a means to an end. I understood that if she did come back into my life, it wouldn't be with grand gestures or immediate reconciliation. If anything, it would be carefully guarded, tentative, and I had to decide what I was willing to do when that day came. I owed her nothing, not a second chance, not forgiveness. But I wasn't entirely closed off to the idea, provided it wouldn't cost me the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim. Then, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, while browsing the local farmer's market, it happened. I was selecting heirloom tomatoes and debating whether to grab a jar of fig jam when I heard her. Dad. The voice made me turn instinctively, and there she stood. Just a few feet away, Camilla looked smaller somehow. Her pale face framed by her tied-back hair, her eyes swollen but clear and steady. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, no makeup or facade. Just Camilla standing before me like a stranger and yet so familiar. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said softly. I simply nodded. "It's my Saturday thing." The space between us bristled with hesitation, but neither of us moved. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice was quiet but firm, her gaze searching mine. I gave a small nod. "Sure." We found a bench at the edge of the market square, a spot that was public enough to feel neutral but quiet enough to speak freely. She inhaled deeply before starting. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, about what I said and did." Her voice trembled slightly as she pushed forward. "At first I just felt betrayed, like you didn't love me enough to show up when I needed you. But then I started unpacking things, the way I've treated you over the years, how I've always assumed you'd say yes no matter what. And I realized I've been unfair, really unfair." I sat silently and let her continue. "I've been selfish, entitled even. And it wasn't just about the wedding, it's been like that for years. I thought love meant you'd just keep showing up for me, even when I treated you terribly. But that's not love, that's abuse. And I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air between us as we both fell silent for a stretch of time that felt endless. She turned her eyes away briefly, almost as though steeling herself for what came next. "Thank you for saying that," I finally said. "It matters." She nodded quickly, relief flickering across her features even as she tried to maintain composure. "I don't expect us to go back to how things used to be," she said cautiously. "Honestly, I'm not even sure what normal looks like anymore. But I miss you. I miss us. And if you're willing, I'd like to try and fix this." I studied her face as carefully as ever, not for signs of manipulation or insincerity, because there were none, but because this felt real in a way it hadn't before. She looked raw, vulnerable in a way that words could never fake. "I don't know exactly what fixing this means or what it looks like," I admitted honestly. "But I think I'm open to figuring it out, with one condition. We do it differently this time. As equals." Her gaze dropped briefly before meeting mine again with cautious determination. "That's more than fair," she said quietly. "We didn't hug or cry, there were no theatrics or dramatic reconciliations. Instead, we simply sat side by side on that bench while life moved on around us, shoppers with their market bags, coffee cups clutched in hand as they wandered by without realizing that everything for us had quietly shifted beneath our feet. Maybe this was healing. Not a loud proclamation of forgiveness, but a mutual willingness to start over on new terms. When we parted ways later that afternoon, I walked home slowly, my hands empty though I'd planned to pick up groceries. Somehow, they didn't matter anymore. My heart felt both heavier and lighter at once, heavy with the memories of what we'd endured, and lighter with the quiet hope of what might come next. Experience taught me not to expect overnight transformation. Real change would. The story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, establishing boundaries, and understanding that sometimes the most challenging decision is simply choosing to walk away. If this resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have made the same choice? What might you have done differently? And if stories like these strike a chord, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more genuine and unfiltered family narratives that hold nothing back. See you next time!